Yeah. Um, I reckon it's a great topic that we've got. It's about executive agency, yours or mine, someone's, we're all looking at executive agency, sort of like, so for instance, like what's happening when someone's sleepwalking, for instance. Have you thought about that? Because of course, like if something is going on there, for instance, like when you're looking at someone that is sleepwalking, what would we know about that first of all? Would you think? So something is there, though, isn't it? Because the person's walking around, right? But a part of their brain is asleep still, but another part is sort of active, um, where the moment is, where this is. Um, there's all sorts of things could describe that for sure, and things are more multiple caused, not singularly caused. But it's interesting, isn't it, just for us to be considering what the program is a little about, because you've got, like you said, there's an executive agency somewhere there because the person's walking, like you said, but then part of their mind is still asleep, and that's true. As that's been looked at, it's for sure things going on. So just like, I guess, you'd consider that if something is going on like that, it's sort of multiple caused, but it's a general thing that someone wouldn't sleepwalk. Would you agree? Where someone really has the condition of that, where they could have had moments where they sleepwalk and things. It could be momentary things, but like perhaps many of us really haven't had anything happen like that, but we could have as we were children, uh, you know, and so, but like, what's going on where that happens, because it's a general thing that wouldn't ordinarily be. But so it just gives us insight a little more into the idea that our state of being really is happening, and what you're looking at on the outside has something which is connected to, that's engaging what that behaviour is inside. So neurologically, where somebody's fully aware, of course, it's a dramatic, reduced, um, unintelligent sort of hum, which usually is like more present, sort of a bit. Um, the thalamus, like of our brain, it's like a way station, really. You could think about this as a stem coming up from the stem, and all sensory information comes in through there, and it's sort of interpreted relatively. Um, and so there's degrees of centrally sort of being awake, and but yet, awareness is over the top of wakefulness. So wakefulness itself is only 7 plus or minus 2 chunks of information, and and so and you do need the frontal cortex to be able to be more having consciousness, and so a proper, respiration and these sorts of things all cause someone to be a little bit more full whole brain patterned. But where somebody is in an averse state, there can be bits and pieces that aren't integrated properly per se, and even like, you could imagine all sorts of psychological mutism and things where something is present there, but it's selective that someone is psychologically muted that out or something, you see. So awareness is over the top of sort of dreaming, of course, and deep sleep also, and is always present, and wakefulness also. It's awareness is over the top of, and so information has got to really pass from one hemisphere to the other, and it passes through the corpus callosum, and just to give you a good example, somebody could really be skillful and they could really be able to have use of both hands in the way that they perhaps, like if somebody's left-handed, it's possible for them to have been able to develop the right hand to be able to have written as well, and the right hand could be just nearly as good as what the left hand is if somebody's sort of more left-handed. And even just perfect, in fact, just about. Okay. So if you've learned how to write, then you can write with your toes, or you could just write with your mouth. So yes, okay. So it's sort of like a motor engram that you have, and where if you were asked to draw a circle and draw a square at the same time, that's a very good exercise. It's like, which is looking at, thinking about where executive agency is, where the brain is. It's sort of really what hemisphere is more dominant relative, and how synchronized the hemispheres are together, and how separate could they be? For instance, like in the asking of you to draw a circle whilst you're drawing a square at the same time, and put a pen in both hands to do this, and paper under both pens, and so you're drawing a circle as you draw a square. Okay, so each hemisphere has the ability to be able to direct up to a certain point, 20% more or less the hand on that side, but 80% sort of switches over to the other side of the brain. So our left hemisphere is controlling 80% of our right hand, for instance, and our right hemisphere is controlling 20% of our right hand, and the same thing for the left hemisphere. So our right hemisphere is controlling 80% of our left side of our body, and 20% of the left side of the body goes to the left hemisphere. Okay. So the left hemisphere is really involved in kinesthetic motor sequencing, and it connects the frontal cortex to the back of the brain, whereas the right hemisphere is very much more connected to internal milieu, and there could be loss of boundaries and all sorts of things where that goes on in degrees of, behaviour. And so what we would just say is how awake someone is and how awake you are, but yet, of course, how aware you are. It really is awareness over the top of all of this, so that you've got a beautiful just inner silence and stillness and transparency more there, where you're able just to be in a non-biased state where you're doing things. So otherwise, of course, you've got degrees of your being a bit able to be associated to subject matter, yes, and also how integrated, meaning all the parts are flowing, and what's congruent, meaning in the channels that's existing, what's supportive, and what's going on in those channels below in the other senses and things. And some bits of this come forward a bit more because it's more weighted in other channels and things. And you have a random phoneme generator which is skimming all of this, which is picking things out and causing you to have a choice of wordness and things like this, you see. Yeah. So first, of course, like when you're looking at something like this, where's the agency and where's your executive, control? And is this more inside the body, or is this sort of more outside? Where's your locus of control spatially, you see? Yeah, so there's various things sort of going on where this is, but your omnipresent self is more your way out, because it's sort of really, you're more in eye awareness, emptiness, and simple in care. And then the brain is going to be functioning pretty good if you're in this state. So where the multiple channels are, it's really more than 10,000 things said. It's just one thing said, which causes your mind to fall more quiet. And that is incredible. So whilst you're in this moment sort of forever. And so what's your expectation, you see? Because that's sort of something precognitive, isn't it? And your energy motion is impacting decision. And dopamine reward versus signaling from various other areas like the insula of the brain, which stops you from being able to detect diversion, or you're detecting aversion sort of thing. And what happens where the frontal cortex would have been neurologically inhibited in that circumstance, so that your executive guidance isn't as much, and you're just relying upon sort of more rote-learned short sequence sorts of things that could have gone on, where a Tourette type of a syndrome would have been in the past sort of quickly triggered more, which one can have the practice of keeping the emotion at 2, and keep having your shoulders relaxed and tummy relaxed and being empty of internal dialogue. So what happens when the frontal cortex is not present, or is, of course, a morality is something which is being engaged in the frontal cortex, and emotion assists, of course, you to be more whole brain patterned and total, versus the amygdala could have been triggered, and it causes someone no longer to be really in the front of their cortex, okay, and not too much connected to the outside world either, because the frontal cortex is very much connected to the left hemisphere, and the back of the brain far more, okay, and the right hemisphere is much more connected to internal milieu. And the medial forebrain bundle always, in all a species, all has the same sort of conditioning where the brain is. And so what happens as you have interest and pleasure, of course, your shoulders relaxed, and there's an inner quiet more, somebody has access to ever more totalness of more themselves. And so isn't this sort of something where decisions are made the best, of course, and the mimicking of all this, which is just natural and social, where contact is, you see. And so detailed imaging of things which is wiring in new behavior by movement, and wiring in new movement experience, the mind can conceive new possibilities. So the brain really is functioning, of course, and you could imagine, how could things like that impact generations even? It's interesting, isn't it? Which it does, of course, traumatic event. And how also, of course, where somebody has good skill to do some things, and they've built an extraordinary capacity to have this, and so that's something which then comes to be passed on more. So behavior really grows cells. It grows cells to respond where some neededness would be, and what fitness you have is above and beyond what's ordinarily regularly required. And so offspring can have far more cells which express some change where things are, where our involutedness is, and where brain is, and how you're sort of looking at behavior, for instance. And so could somebody be led astray? Of course, we could see things going on where that is, and what's necessary where what's essential, evermore on what choice really is alongside agency, your own agency. It's interesting, Lukey, because when you're looking at things like that, you can see in milliseconds, before an action potential is sent along a nerve, the sense of agency has created a sense of control, and even taken away what could be just interrupted sometime, where somebody's underway, where a program is. And like you could imagine, you might be running toward jumping when you were little, perhaps, you could remember, and suddenly it would be that you could have thought, I'm not sure if I've got enough pace to get the distance that I thought I would. But at some point, you could pull back from that, but otherwise it could be committed and realise, but are not able to have pulled back in time. But so a sense of our agency, where you're on a train and we're all going to be going forward, and the train on the other side starts to go in the other direction, and so all of us, we lean forward ourselves, in a manner of having thought that our train is moving, see, because something peripheral just set this off. So, whereas agency, where meaning is, where you're, it's like a machine perhaps, but yet what's happening also, like it's multiple cause more and influenced, where expectation is, for instance, of others, and how spontaneous, creative intelligence is, where life, is more unscripted, and so you've got, of course, metabolic conditioning. It's a typical thing that sort of metabolic conditions can have been a cause of someone to have an excessive amount of epinephrine, which is a don't, one, can't, and all sorts of risky like sorts of behaviour to be connected ever more to be awake, where metabolism isn't functional properly. And so, just like the life colloid in your intestine, and right through the body, all harvest energy, and how much hemisynchronization that is, between the hemispheres, is so important, because you're going to have a greater amplitude of energy available to yourself where the hemispheres are functional together. And so, the vestibular sense is regulating the tonus, and the B field, and how much voltage relative things are. And so, where somebody is awake or not, there's degrees of which somebody could feel balance and this sort of thing. And how easy it is for the vestibular apparatus to function versus, it's all clogged up and doesn't give people proper signal for things. So, of course, where consciousness is itself, like we started out to say, how much energy do you have, and are you able to be in your frontal cortex? And we know, of course, that where things could have gone on, it can have caused you to no longer be more in your frontal cortex. And what's deep sleep? It's just a state where there is no connection between memory. Okay. But awareness has existed over that. Somebody could note, oh, yes, I had a good sleep, or not, and things. And so everything is magnetic, and magnicity is where you've got dynamic current flowing from this, and it's converting energy, your emotion, and the way that you've emptied things out. Let's say bliss is existing. And so what's usable, that's perfect, it's sort of not anything necessarily that's sort of past your lips, but something which you're sipping, and you've got a beautiful nectar that you're creating more where your mouth is. So magnetic current and all of the life colloid where our organelle are all act as rectifier and types of rectanner. You've got cells which pick up energy and start to prepare, and so it's what all of those things is relative to a fitness someone might have, where their sexual expression is, or their will and things, and so a behaviour can cause hormone certain, and how relaxed somebody is, more grounded. Somebody's going to be able to produce more testosterone relative. That's basic, that comes from more grounded relative state. So Leydig cells are specialised more where the testes are, and testosterone, and which you might note, which could be easy to see in somatotyping by looking at the hand. You can tell how long more or less the ring finger is relative, and that could give someone an indication pretty much of whether somebody's really got more testosterone or really perhaps epigenetically don't have as much. So epigenetics and things where consciousness is all kinds of food and toxins and stuff, but what if that wasn't, of course, and you're just in where life food is? So you see, we've got multiple cause things going on, and metabolism and testosterone really is necessary, is very necessary, of course, where molecules are. You've got also oxygenated dibenzoate, which is like where it's a substance which comes from life that's in an oxidative environment versus it comes to be anoxic and it's more petroleunated. So there's these oxygenated dibenzoate which pair up where cells are, which have to have quite a bit of energy, you see. And so you've got heat and cultural protein, which the body wouldn't be born with, and those are things which come to be in the cell membrane and assist to cause the triggering of things. But what happens if it's all clogged up? You see, that's all has to be cleared away. That's something which is multiple caused, isn't it? So things that singularly cause, it's a little bit not quite right where that thinking is. You've to be ever more like me or anyone else, having a thought of what could be confounding variables, so many, of course, to cause something not to be so, like you thought. And so behavior creates neurotransmitters and things. And so this benzoate, oxygenated benzoate really is a veritable proton pump. And what happens where you've got that there? So life colloid where the intestine is, you've got life colloid which assists to cause transportation of nutrients and everything. What would be the reason why, in French, in other languages as well, they've got expressions like increased de foie, which really means where somebody's anger, it's sort of, but it's like stress of the liver and increased de foie. So where energy really is demanded, of course, cells are critical, and like the liver and heart and kidney, you've got very small micronutrient, which makes a very big difference, of course, in calming and quietening. Fermented food more quiets and calms. And other foods cause you to have a certain amount of histamine that can cause sensual expression, but also to neurotransmitters to be produced. And so hormone and behavior where somebody's feeling connected more, they're going to have a lot more oxytocin and everything, for instance. And so these are the things which more have developed our species. Our frontal cortex has grown out of an anatomy directly implicating interest. And so molecules that are needed, of course, you see, you've got the maintenance for gender, for instance, and sensual expression, where the egg and the sperm and estrogen and is, for instance, in testosterone. You've got these cells, like the Leydig cells, which produce this microvoltage where it has a molecule that can assist to help this. And so rhodium, osmium, and ruthenium, little known, only just starting to become aware. But how is it all transported? These are things which our work is a lot about, but sticking with the idea that sleepwalking, where that's going on, can be, of course, parts of the brain which have become awake and parts that are not, and bits and pieces of things which are still asleep. And we're talking really about how someone really expresses themselves and what's conditioned. And most, you could say, Pavlovian conditioning is really huge. And how you'd have to take that out, for instance, or look at that, certainly. So Leydig cells, where ovaries are, for instance, that cells are these Saker interna cells, which function the same. And so cellular uniqueness really is between him and her, of course, very much so. And both produce androgen, which are a beautiful supermolecule. If you've got these oxygenated dibenzoate, which you could because you live close to nature more, I mean, it wasn't in a surgically sort of sterile type of environment that you were living in, you'd have these. But otherwise, they're not too present because you'd get that from Life Colloid, like it's a product that we have. And you're starting to get some more ideas how incredible it is, the Life Colloid that you have in your intestine. So where someone has got their oats, how much could you say somebody's ability is existing, where we are as a society, to see, who's sort of in control and what's lawful, a guarantee of rights and freedom that we have. And so somebody could easily see, oh, I see how title conversion, man or woman, isn't in any document. How bad is that? It's supposed to be then a good, proper Supreme Charter, which doesn't exist, so should be, shouldn't it? And national rights and charter and people's freedom where things are, and coming to be understanding what the fraud can have been existed, and yet how to correct all of this, you see. So where you are, your own self, where's your executive guidance, and how much does somebody have access to their oats? And so, you've got Leydig cells there for males, and you've got ovarian Hillis cells for her, and these produce testosterone for her. Okay. So if somebody really is avoiding conflict and they're totally always sorting for agreement, how much of your whole oats is really behind something? And so what produces energy in demand, of course, and so you've really got the parts of your own self, which are like guests, and you're the house master. And then all these guests are coming light to your altar and kind of leaving light to, yes. And so how much energy do you have as a result? Wow, quite a bit, because certain it is that where resistance is, it occupies really a lot of cortex, for sure, and occupies energy. And so this NASFET, which you'd look into the work that we have that relates to this, it's a noble element, semiconductive field effect transfer design, which taps energy from a JC contact, which you could learn a little bit more about. But so your Leydig cells, and these are ovarian Hillis cell, which we're talking about, where the ovaries are, of course, and these are the same. And so if you're really looking at everything, you could definitely say a whole range of things are sort of multiple cause, isn't it? But we could keep going where things are, because you've got sites which really are very high ordered, and of course people to have good cognitive processing and sort of already designed for this. And so questions has to be like, what's below what you could hear, subsonic and sonic sound, and how quiet or what the activity is where something is, you see. And could you be aware of what subsonic? No, because that's subsonic or ultrasonic. Yeah. Okay. So there's a lot of things, couldn't you say? And wouldn't you be considered that all sorts of things like even electromagnetic energy and all this sort of thing can it be causing someone to not necessarily have proper metabolism? But what else also could there be sort of things, because resonance is really is beyond heat ionization. It could be so instant that something is destroyed. That how would you know that it got hot and it got cold really in 10,000th of a second, where sonoluminescence would be, for instance, and where the emission of light implodes bubbles where liquid is, and when that's excited by sound through sonoluminescence, you can see the production of light all of a sudden, like, burst or sound. And then looking at where light is emitted, of course, you've got tiny bubbles which are suspended in a liquid and subject to intense acoustic sort of pressure. You could feel a sense of danger where something is. And so, someone's face could go red because they were embarrassed or an octopus could have got angry, for instance, and it would go red too, or go white like a sheet if it was, nervous and fearful. So it's really the management of where anything is, and there's a magnetization where things are, and a resonance, and sonoluminescence, like we're talking, is ultrasound wave that's emitted. And so, for instance, could cell phone, for instance, target people through targeting the bubble where it's in a liquid state and collapsing that violently, emitting a brief flash of light, like you're looking at an acoustic wave that's moved through a liquid, along with what as a phenomenon of resonance, and this sort of describing how a response could be where external force might be applied where vibration is, and specific frequencies are. And can't we consider how relaxed your shoulders are, or how quiet relative, but how much alpha rhythm there is naturally versus no, it's all squared out, incredible for machine noise, and the signal isn't pyramidal but more all squared out. So couldn't we say certainly somebody could be maybe in a state of bright, where you're in front of somebody who's really emitting a lot of gamma wave, for instance, and it causes others to emit more alpha wave and have more serotonin themselves and everything. So, but like in this example we just said, sonoluminescence is the phenomenon where light emission acoustically could have driven a bubble so that it was resonant to expand and collapse very quickly, and shred things, and cause damage where the body is. So trapped also sort of anode and resonant standing wave all undergo sort of violent collapse where you're emitting brief energy flashes where light is. And these are the things where somebody could have gone into a bardo state, slight where between death and awakefulness, where, energy is sort of like flashes of this is connecting us more to the ether. And so a long time ago, of course, it would be known that an oscillatory rate could be that was mortal, meaning that you could explode life colloid and you could see frequencies which could do things just like that. And so just we could not know quite like, yes, but what frequencies and all sorts of things are used can be caused to be subdued of a brain function, and what degree do you have ability to laugh about things is really not any control of anything happening on the outside, but that's something happening on the inside. And so how fit somebody is ever more relative to where things go on. Couldn't you say that resonance itself is not really something to sort of really be studied so much, and should be, of course, because all sorts of non-ionizing types of effect can all go on. And certain where sound is and music and things like that, which people could tune into, like music, and learn what this is all about and how does that affect your brain stem and everything. So we've been talking just a little bit about, how somebody who's in control, but who's there where you're sleepwalking. You've got something automatic. You've got what's happening below the surface. So, and where's consciousness where this is, you see, and what about your awareness over the top of all of this? And has anybody accessed ever more this component of ourselves? Well, if we did, we would have been able to dramatically reduce a lot of all of the unintelligent hum that's typical that would be there. So you've got standing ways and dangers where it's certain that necessary, slow, sustained, noticed heat, per se, can be sudden, and can be only in minutes of a signal pulse relative. So burst, something that's like that, where it's just 10,000ths of a second, that something gets cotated. How could it be that any noticeness per se could be, of course, which, of course, a knowledge is, an awareness is more that can cause someone to be aware of what is going on, where things are. So what's happening back at the ranch house where interference would have been, where instead you've got something that's more resonant and coupled, and that is a vibration more from nature. And so gas bubbles all become trapped where needles cannot be necessarily aspirated and things, and cause embolism and what have you. And trapped bubbles, which in this story can be present, which is tiny little chylomicron of fat and things, and a square wave all interferes where that is. So where servedness is of no interference, of course, you've got proper normal function, and oxygen binding to hydrogen is all perfect. Otherwise, some interferedness is where like a 20 to 40 kilohertz resonant frequency is. And so where saving is of your energy, but what's knowledgeable at the moment, where music is and where resonance is, you see. Be wise that you could look into the program that we've got more about life music. Okay. So on any beautiful bluebird day, you've got waves which are present and can contract and can cause cells to and life quality to expand and contract relative to sound pressures and things. And the bubble where things are undergoes, like what we're talking about, where this is a signal that's sent, like, so it's a directed energy weapon more. And how do we know or anything that's going on, because so much is sort of really covert where things are, you see, and it's not transparent. But the flashing picoseconds of duration really is where this is in the sonoluminescence, and a color burst like a blue-violet spectrum magnetic resistant sort of color, sort of low to low power sort of radio wave, which is examples where dangers could be where the absorption of things are, where strength of duration is, and you've got a whole range of cocktails of oxygen, and how does that impact it where you've got 60 gigahertz cycle, where that's minimal, that it's a comparable magnetic resistance which is seen in a solid state of that material and impacting it itself, like air, for instance, water, hydrogen and oxygen. So where objects are, of course, how much do you have of your own energy, and what's going on that's actually helped builds this? And certain, like, just like a dew weapon where stationary objects could be vibrated, and the dangers where something is resonant, but you can not be considered that could have cause heat, and its effect where dermatological symptoms are, so waves upon the skin that didn't necessarily cause heat, but through resonance. You can have symptoms of inflammation and redness and tingling and burning sensations and things like that, where exposures are, and symptoms where fatigue and tiredness is. And we're just really talking a little bit about who's in charge, you see. Yes? Is your mind in control, or is there, of course, multiple channels? And do you have the transpersonal perception? You'd have to have neurotransmitters to have this, and so these are sort of normal conditions which we should have. And how has neurotoxin and things like that affected everything? So it's fundamental resonant frequency, of course, around 5 hertz, which meanwhile where something is a digestive disturbance, subtle, of course, and dizziness and nausea, and in a second that can have been more pulses of 8 to 12 hertz, where plasma is it's a source of something being used where it's a technique and ionizing of gases. And so radio frequency antenna bombards for a gas, of course, which of course it does. And electromagnetic energy radio wave, of course, in typical frequencies of 10 to 50 megahertz cycles, which does accelerate free north negative and also south positive magnetron in our body. And what happens when you have lost that finer vibration within self? So energy, where your brain is, and how much it is energized more by your north negative magnetron colliding where gas is in atoms that get knocked off loose, and north negatives and magnetron stripping things where some condition is created, where you've got sustained plasma discharges with like ball lightning. Can we look into what that's about? And is there any things that are going on where the body is? And yes, microscopic. What you've got is resonant magnetic wave, and you've got a natural frequency where material is, where a system is. And so what's increased where coherence is versus incoherency, and what is the significant amplitude and oscillation, where danger could be, where resonance is. Magnetic wave match natural frequency, and the material of a system could have led things to be significantly increased, of course, in amplitude and oscillation itself. And the resistance state that it had to be bound where atoms was could become undone ever more. And so slump posture, certain, is just an example of this, and decreasing the whole body resonance. So what's known more, of course, like about piggyback frequency waves and things, and piggyback resonant frequency, which is referring to how you're looking at secondary vibrational modes that's put over a composite structure. It's like another wave carrying this. Okay. So it's primary concern where anybody is, where your own precision is in your stability, and what's your secondary mode more of performance. You see, you've got colloid like the DNA, and you've got all kinds of molecules which are coiled, and you've got coupled multi-coil inductors where the body is. And so circuits come to be made a lot more like this, you see. So wireless power transfer, and sort of what is the parasitic sort of capacitance, where some inductor is where windedness is, and its own createdness where a molecule is, and it's higher frequency to not have perhaps parasitic piggyback resonant frequencies present. And so could we say that directed energy weapons and things like this, which is typical, don't damage, or you could say that heat could be noticed where a particular type of frequency is. And so this is just not just ionized radiation, but it is this in another form, of course, well and truly. Dangers where the use of technology is controlled. You really are looking at high-powered microwave types of weaponry and things, and targeting that and our body could be disrupting resonantly, and who's to say that because something did or didn't have a thermal overload? Okay, resonance needs to be looked at well and truly. So directed energy weapons, where ranged weapons are, and things that's like this, it's certain that these can impact mood. And so just to give you an example, of course, how much natural pyramidal waves more are existed, that's the ultimate. But where a site is measured, it could be looked at for how much ultrasonic or subsonic sort of sound has existed at the site and things, how quiet relativity is. And so you could say all of these things could be conditions of multiple channel, which is where's your expectation, you see, the emotion that you have, where others are, and what's impacting your decisions. And Whereas your essential choice, which is alongside your agency, and as we talked, like 15 milliseconds before any action potential is sent, you've got this created sense of control, and what's going on where that could have been taken away from somebody, you see? So isn't this something which is about your turning up or on or off or down, which is the vestibular system and having access to this? Yes. And can you do this if you haven't polarized your own first attention? No. But once you've polarized your own first attention, how good is that? You have access to ever more of this. So you're relying upon some coordinated activity where your prefrontal cortex is and septal region in relation to our amygdala function. So this first component is all relates to more pleasure and interest and whole brain functioning, and our amygdala being triggered is limited mind function because it neurologically inhibits the frontal cortex. So allowing long-range sort of networked, synchronized conditions where fear could be as a program campaign unknown. Of course, somebody would ever do things like that, which is going on, and a combination of extracellular recordedness and pharmacological, you've got optogenetic sort of manipulation. And all of this is report where if you look at brain freeze and behaviors where expression is of fear and temporary coinciding always with a sustained generated 4 oscillative, a 4 hertz oscillation. And with the prefrontal cortex and prefrontal amygdala circuits, where aversion is triggered of a 4 hertz cycle, an oscillation, and people can look at that and predict the freezing onset that would come, and synchronizedness, where that would be of the prefrontal amygdala itself, that circuit, neurologically inhibiting the septal region and frontal cortex. So optogenics in inducted prefrontal sort of 4 hertz cycle all can impact the prefrontal amygdala activity and eliciting ever more fear behavior. And so I think that you looking at all of this sort of unraveling this a novel type of deeper insight where things are to sustained oscillatory mechanisms. You've got things mediating prefrontal amygdala coupling that's certain during behavioral fear, like we were saying. And so just as anybody would have to pass through the gates of hell where people have been, and where is people misled, where the present is of any scandemic going on in the past and present. So what criminals could be existed where you've got a criminal banking cartel of one world order, and nobody would say that no tactic of asymmetric warfare is organized, that a monopoly is over some other nation, and so they're not necessarily managing their own affairs at all. And so what's existing that's big time, that's not small really, is like a truck, for instance, of course. But one's got to make sure that some cognitive load is where something is in its design, and what you look at or listen to. And of course, comparatives look what's going on where you're bombarded by all sorts of advertisement, which is really like word salad, and it's throwing in all sorts of things which could be adverse to what the subject matter, which was something that you were listening to, and things. And so all of it adds up to some subject matter and superimposing something where anyone is like watching anything or listening. And so you've got an automatic mind activated, and you've got also new cognitive sort of schema, which can become embedded, where command is. Word salad could be put, which you couldn't think that's put to be actual influence, which a lot of that stuff is also. So your mind could be attempting to sort of update some old task and be reminded of that. And then the status of the way that you would go about doing things then doesn't add up, because you just have often sabotaged yourself instead. And so where's the agency, as we started to talk about here, which is who's in control, whether somebody's sleepwalking. Of course, a closest related conditioning going on can be something that's not integrated. It can have been about the day before and things, and somebody's dreaming back through to the moment that happened the day before, and dreaming through that, and coming to some moment which could have been some sort of discharge, and triggers things to be slightly, I don't know if I can keep this to be where everybody knows that, or this and these things, and so the brain can have psychological mutism for some things. So the closest related concept, like we're talking right now, where energy is like looking into spike wave discharge, which is really prominent feature where epileptic sort of construing is, or where you're looking at two spike waves which are experienced, where selective restrictive violation is responded to by anybody usual, except for where somebody becomes mature, you're rising above the knee-jerk reaction of things. But otherwise, sort of, there's a reactedness to anybody's selective restrictive violation in their own cognition and behaviour, where it's a witness. You've got a little bit of a spike that goes through your own programmedness, where this is, and other magnetic programming sort of initially sort of interrupts. What's going on is interrupted by that spike slightly. Of course it is, sure. And then there's a response to that, which is an adjusted sort of spike, a respondedness. So there's two, you see, that goes on where some responses to anything that's interruptive relative. So it behooves everybody to really be more Hobart pattern, doesn't it? Because you do get care. People are more in their whole brain function cortex. But what happens where 4 Hertz oscillation could be an accurate predictor of brain phase and the onset of whatever this is, as the brain outer cortex excessively excitable and prone to abnormal sort of electrical activity, aversion alongside irritableness, it can be detected certainly on an electroencephalogram, and specific abnormal waveforms, certain like sharp spikes. Yeah. So you've got periodic discharge, which is always seen in irritableness, and in the electroencephalograms you can see these spikes and periodic discharge. And whole brain functioning really being installed, you're really looking at something so different. It's incredible. The resources remained automatic, and evermore that's installed is a resource of your whole brain pattern and a great totality. So you're really not in any bias anymore. You see, this is being more eyewear. So whole brain functioning is really certain that you've got reduced stress, shoulders relaxed, tummy relaxed, you've got an analog sculptedness that assists you to go toward things, and your own inner kinesthetic self in the mastery, managing things more on the outside. And so this is sort of an outward lived meditation, sitting, walking, living, ongoing, and not turned on or off or just in one spot somewhere. So besides relaxation, you've got this yoga-like sense of life, the alpha wave, which is a great boost to your own creativity. You've got white and pink and brown noise and sort of binary beat and solfeggio sort of frequency you could listen to and study a little. So the specific ambient sounds where rain is, or deep sleep music and stress hormone, primarily epinephrine and for adrenaline, and norepinephrine, noradrenaline, which all of those trigger fight, flight, fright, fear, response, you see. So everything is sort of more state specific, and suddenly where something was which you could have looked at without a large enough resource state, the amygdala could have hijacked the rest of the neurology, because that's how it works. And to cope, to calm the amygdala, one they could have all sorts of practice techniques and things, which is perhaps, lengthening the breath through your nose, asking yourself what's beneficial. Are you in eye awareness? So mindfulness is ever more where your own meditative state is, and an overactiveness could have really been like thoughts, worries, distractions, and the peace that you could have where things are. And so no one will say that these things are not an actual resonance, which it is, and that by accessing that resonance, you're also able to access beautiful landscapes within yourself, which activates neurology and associated focus where you are, where soundscape is more rapidly modulated, though in amplitude and rhythm. Patterns can encourage a state where that's used for a range of things like a deeper concentration, minimizing what someone's distraction might be usual. Otherwise, amygdala hijack, you see, it could be powerfully having affected and being intense for you, a sudden emotional reactions where that's gone on. You could remember. These are things that can be cleared away and reframed. You could have something put there more, which is more comfortable and relaxed, and instead, you see, and wire the new movement experience in where things are. So automatically, some adverse state that could have been can be just dissolved and gone. And of course, how you or anybody else is really keeping company of like-mindedness, and it's really, we're talking about how our self is kept company, you see. So aversion would have been if it was neurologically, like we've just been talking the story, shut down where things were, and a lack of whole brain patterning afterward. And amygdala adversiveness, where that would have been not letting go, holding on to, and responding where remainedness was going over things and not exiting, and polarization. And start redirect isn't existed because somebody could put in the most negative terms anything you want to drop, so as you're able to just drop that stuff. Otherwise, it's sort of tiptoeing no longer, isn't it? You've got your own response where things are triggered, where your own resource is, and in relation to, some moment was where that wasn't the case or something else was, and who's in control where somebody would have been sleepwalking there for a moment where that happened, you see. So all of us could have moments where something was more autistic in ourselves and things in degrees of this. So these are all expressions of behavior and things that could have created things. And things are more multiple caused. So the neocortex, or your rational brain, that's triggered. And what happens when you go to do something, but you're bringing your past and putting it around in front of you, so you're just running into that and evaluating ongoing feedback from that. And that is imagined, but it's to have stopped perhaps something new, which you could have done, and some triggered knee-jerk adverse to mental condition could be changed because you've got ever more interest and pleasure really being wired in good. And the resource state is large enough that it collapses in a stuck state, you see, so you don't really have that amygdala type of knee-jerk reaction going on. And the pace of things is more auditory and kinesthetic versus always a never not in the note of not G, but A, and not sort of in a relative rhythm like what this is, but talking really fast and getting it all clipped up and going at a pace like that. So you've got resistance transfer, which we could talk just a tiny bit about here a little. As far as your executive guidance is concerned, you're in the frontal cortex, but what happens where things have gone on you didn't know what that was, but like how about for now, totally for always, access resource state and focus on what's resourceful, that you could say those are the things which is better. Otherwise, you really do have a resistance transfer, an asymmetric warfare tactic, isn't it? Yes, by the CB Cower monopolized media, which is really designed to label, and so it will cause you to view whatever's there very warped, and it's got its own astroturfy, meaning it's not really any grassroots movement behind it, it's just false. But in the corpse of that shifted around with some corset or furniture is an upstairs room, it's not really changing anything for real, but it's certain that what you imagine and what's real, the body could be perceived the same way. So looking at resistance transfer, you really got a proper logarithm, which should be, and it's straight away for us to be able to determine if something is a proper logarithm or not. 78% of your nervous system typically should be sure for something to get passed on relative, and where that's interfered with, something doesn't get passed on. Psychological practice where somebody's never, not, always, but, try, and they're into necessity versus modal operators of choice. And what's the choice is that you've got isn't my giving you a straw man argument of two opposites which don't fit your natural sense of things. So whole brain functioning really is applying resource state to get rid of adverse stuck state. You're giving synesthesias to be able to do this, and it's benefiting more where a spiritual account it is, your own personal development. Nobody would say that a criminal bank cartel of a one world order didn't exploit and has exploited everything for the past, and that's you and I in having allowed some system to be which should be corrected. Otherwise, hell certainly is, and nobody could say that one should or should not have their own compass, all of us, and the child grown to be in maturedness, is a village and a family and a nation, you see. So you can't tell me that serious unethical sort of activeness isn't something that's designed as a tactic, which is of causing resistance transfer where things are and impacting you as an observer. And so whatever excellence there could be, you could agree with, of course, there could be some stubborn, irrational part where that was having been conditioned Pavlovian-wise, and some defense sort of for not really valuing what you should and grow these parts up to be whole. So exploiting emotion and manipulatedness where somebody could become more confident, than maybe they should be confident too much about what that is. Encouraging anything to be targeted where some expressed fears or insecurities or any past trauma. But, we're talking about whole brain patterning and building rapport and trust and encouraging a dependency, an interdependency. You see, so you've got an interdependence, transference, and that's positive towards yourself and others, versus targeting wherever that goes on, and the use of resistance as a weapon where a target could be shown resistant, sort of manipulated types of agenda to you, causing associatedness more to those things, and rejecting whatever person's right would be to their own independent analysis or your own feeling or thought about the truth about something. So rapport is really listening and not really having any judgment, of course, and having encouragement where somebody else is to find their own path, of course, where change is. And a goal is really to more empower the individual, absolutely, versus using, dissociation, distraction, interrogation, and intimidation. And if that was done and somebody did what the victor did, not the victim, how did that play itself out where somebody just took on the victor's role, and where something is, and who's in control where somebody's sort of sleepwalking sort of thing? What's the benefit? And of course, the manipulator's own benefit. So because there's 4 types of stupidity, which isn't going to be the cause of us to benefit. So throwing away fake details and getting rid of what's bizarre and unrelated, and really turning ever more straight to look at, see what isn't truth, of course, and what is, and what's conscious, where you are, where transference is about things and the way you interpret new information. And so it's positive, of course, where something wasn't limited, and to negative condition per se, and what is absolute that you're focused on, which is of course toward and forward rather than away from and outside of, as direction, more where you're looking at the vestibular sense and the use of direction. So somebody has to be able to see things more contrasted, and one is ever more like suddenly subject to something totally that they couldn't have been aware of before, and whole brain patterning is ever more now. And where there was sort of a negative, painful experience in the past, you've got an logarithm now which causes all that to be filtered, so you're more associated where present tense now is, and so you've been able to dissociate away from whatever wasn't, sort of thing. That just was because you've associated toward something else. You see, you can only do one thing at a time. So one stops all that stress and gets ever more listening, and certain it is that how could you do that with some negative, some controlledness, or somebody's only just listening and all they want is some quick relief. But silence, of course, how good is this in eye awareness, and what's giving you this and it's tipping you into it ever more automatically. So it's what can you let go of, where it's any unhealthy habit has been, where you're avoiding things and what have you. And this is your meditation ongoing, sitting, walking, living. And this is your yoga. And so being flexible in your body is flexible in your mind. And so all of us, we should really be aware where resistance behaviours would have been in some context. It's sort of typical that is being used to control or manipulate, probable, but could that be also because you're getting proper information where something is verbal tactic and arguedness, where somebody could have been making excuses and avoiding everything, sort of thing, and skipping appointments and sort of changing the subject. Is that somebody who could probably maybe sleepwalk more? Yes. So what you're looking at, applying whole brain patterning, can you clear up the sleepwalking? Yes. Is it automatic that you've just cleared away whatever involuntariness would have been a knee-jerk reaction in the past? Yes, but of course, like to robustness and beauty and excellence, how good is this? What's stubborn or automatic? That's aversive response that's been, how about putting there now what's tasteful? Keep a focus on the things that relate to what's tasteful, what's fragrant, what smells right to you. And so you've got things going on, what we're talking about, which is involuntary, and it's things that somebody can say, well, I didn't really know that, or why? Well, because it wasn't mentioned. It's brought up into consciousness. And consciousness, like we were talking, is only of a limited phenomenon. So it's your spontaneous creative intelligence, or anybody else's, Lukey, and the faculty to inspire creative interests of the future more, and you've really got strategy, haven't you, for significance. And so it's not a backward past placed sort of condition in the front. That's bad. That's not right. Something would have gone on where that would have been limiting what normal functioning might have been. So how good is it for you to have heard this? You could start to organize your own self and things, and who's in control. So, maybe no more sleepwalking is going on. And it's your thalamus, which is this way station, isn't it? And the degree to which you're awake and have awareness, and awareness is beyond deep sleep, dreaming, and wakefulness. And so aversiveness, where that would have been characterized by choppy type of language and aversive orientatedness, taking people outside themselves, asking questions which would have caused someone to be just in a trans-derivational search for information, because really can't something be answerable per se. But being an active listener is the most important, my God. In your own motor highway, and what intensity can exist, where loss would have been, or grief, or some disparity, or anxiety, or frustration, anger, and could have caused, knee-jerk types of outburstedness. And now those things could be no longer really disproportionate. It can't be triggered like it could have been because you're only focused on what's going forward and what's coming within versus outside and away from, until you're learning how to use outside and away from. So it's a meditation, and it's the following of some repeated excellence like we're talking about, and what's modeled and what's 100% for you, which now you have a greater capacity to have dealt with the things that's uncontrollable, aversive, because you're eliciting a large enough resource state and you're remaining ever more where this is. And so could this be where you just only didn't know, but now you have a focus? Or could it have been where you just was listening to 4-beat, 2 timing, 4 timing, all getting squared out and saturated with that? So the brainstem wasn't being able to really give you any 13 overtone whatsoever. So music is sort of guaranteed that you could come to evermore have a picture that's colourful, rosy, that's used in a way of this, and the brainstem emits 13 overtone verses, 8, and that's going to not be able to cause you to be able to visualize things too much. But life water, even a small amount, can be just the fractal that causes you to start to have coherence more. And in life water, memory can be restored coherently afterward, 6 weeks or more afterward, and things studies show that. So insight into your own vestibular sense, which is your rhythm and balance and equilibrium, and your sense of this really is your capacity to bring this state up more, to be specific and no longer have that panic and lack, because you've just focused on what you're moving as a direction toward and within, and you're changing things around to be, what is this that you're focused on? And so this is what occupies you more versus what's wrong, blame, what you don't want to know, because if you express those behaviors, it's going to kind of cause some relief in your own self or something. It's not really a new mindset of visioning things to correct stuff. So heavy, loud 4-beat timing and metallicness and pump you up and higher, and it's not necessarily treating any tension for sure. It's scorching where some extreme heat is, or cold, or some bitterness outright, but flavor where things are. But what's happening where something is fermented and rotted, and you've got hydrogen sulfide, you've got sharp magnetic shocks and sudden made loud noise, sort of same thing. Examples of aversive behavior, naturally sort of touching a hot stove, going, ow, you see. So during the torture where behavior is modified and used, where resistance transfer is a negative emotion or positives being put toward what's actually not good, or, it's natural that would be toward what's good. But in asymmetric warfare, somebody's chosen all sorts of topics where that is. I mean, that's not the social compact that any of us selected. Okay. So in a day, we've selected a proper compact, haven't we? A republic of peace. So negative inductedness otherwise is a frozen logos, but yes, we're talking about more unity consciousness, where otherwise you've got a criminal banking cartel of a one world order, and you could have seen how a limited mind scriptedness can be by the past, and how crazy that is to uphold. It's too heavy to uphold, you see, where an arm is, which is a unit of currency which all of us own, and currency is positively inducted as supposed to be, should be. So selective restrictive violations, we start to talk just a bit, it's sort of an interruptive spike going through your brain, and where food would have been, or you would have just been like public speaking and things, your internal dialogue could have taken over where that was, and you could have forgot what you were eating, or even forgot what you were sort of tasting or even talking about. So what's non-verbal and verbal integration, where whole brain functioning is, you've really got a congruency, good, where you've got a parallel processing of the channels, good. You've got associatedness, meaning, you're showing up, and it's how you show up. You're getting a score for how you show up relative to life. I mean, how much integration is it where you show up, where things are, meaning, there's an integration where the paths are. So it's apples that you're selecting versus electing. No, it's you're selecting that, not electing that. What's the word salad, where that would have been, and whatever selective restriction violation was going on, where ads had just popped up into things, and how incongruent could all that be of itself? So it's really sorting the style, and what your random phoneme generator is able to pick up and what's weighted below. And Pavlovian really gives us to consider most that a lot of stuff is really a conditioned behavior. So conditioning behavior is really your outward lived meditation, isn't it? And so if somebody could say, where you're listening, ongoing, that where they are now able to sort of manage a selective restrictive violation, or there's all sorts of things going on, isn't it? Like laws, which is a very selective enforcement of itself, and highly unethical violations where somebody's treated to go through something like that, which is totally immoral and incorrect. I mean, where people get let off on, others don't, and these sorts of things are violations of equality. So looking into any matter in your own self and rising in things and not having any evilness where anything is, because that's going to be just something which isn't too integrated, which should be wise that it's acknowledged, and somebody's really learning how to love again, so you don't have that sort of helplessness anymore. So it's active participating wherever the data is, and you're learning how to be active, ever more prudent where change is. And don't you think that this has been coding your DNA? Yes, it is. Don't you think that ever moetic, driven, selfish sorts of genes maybe doesn't violate any thought that's inherited, because it's usual, like a 1-to-1 ratio where something aggregates, fusion, differentiates. You've got life colloid that during any gene movement, of course, life colloid pleomorphism is existing, and a meiosis preferentially sort of is transmitting to the generation more over versus non-selfish sort of alleles which violate our normal code or ethic and genetic encoding, epigenetic sort of where errors in transmissions can be passed on. So, or could have been passed on, but it's not a survival over the forest at the part, or the part where trees are in relation to a tree. You can see a tree, but you can't see the forest. So you have to listen to really what's going on, and what we're talking about really isn't any Darwinism whatsoever. It's really more a mutual lived assistance. So it's the opposite. So it's a principle of copying where genes are expressed equally and revealing previously ever more known genetic plasticity instead. And so we're elucidating all the unique kinds of knowing. You've got comprehensive sorts of body language and movement and examinedness, and where robust states of aversion or pleasure could have been recorded. You can see the sidedness of movement to see the hemisphere participation in the induction of a mood, and circuits where the body movement is could be sometimes illiterate, where sentences but it's an impossible selective restrictive violation or something impossible is going to have triggered some response, and does it have to have not something which causes you to remain more integrated so you're able to remain on track your own self and keep a focus? And so syntax, it does matter, meaning the structure of things going on underneath in who's in control and where you've been maybe sleepwalking or someone did. So where nominalizations and unspecified verb, missing referential index, complex equivalent always are being used, and somebody has no idea those are being used, and so you could have apparently hypnotized yourself in some directedness, but nothing specific behind it, because your brain, just like mine, is generalizing and it's deleting and it's constructing information. And so, who's in control where this is going on? where you're in your sleep waking, for instance. And how about learning ever more about like what eye awareness is? So where hesitation strategy could have been installed, and there was selective restrictive violation, and somebody couldn't poop or get off the pot sort of thing, and they could stick to where their feet is more on the ground, though, going forward, and these are things ever more installed. So waiting something out isn't too good per se. Internal hesitation and all sorts of insistence on what you could do, it's really great to meet you, is offering something, isn't it good? But what happens where that's followed by what's limp, and so it's changing whatever would have been there by some weakness. So how excited you are about any new project, and then all of a sudden some flat tone mono response afterward, is sort of various degrees of sequential and simultaneous incongruencies, and who's in control where something is where somebody would have been sleepwalking, you see? So sensory acuity and all parts of your brain being woken up versus, oh no, there's parts of your brain that sort of been still asleep. And even in sleep, it shows that, because you can be not nose breathing. So your nonverbals reveal a lot, and a great authenticity existing behind what you're saying verbally, and you're not having organ language like this gives me a pain in that, and then you're putting something in there. So congruency where your thinking is and thought, and getting rid of belief, and having action ever more aligned, so that you're in a single unified directedness. Whole brain patterning is certain that as you learn this, there really isn't going to be any more sleepwalking, really. So your technology is cohesive. You've really got an adhering ever more to a strong ethical code, and you've got integrity. You've got what's left intact good, and what's ever unresolved as incongruence doesn't really make any good leadership, for sure. It leads to some sort of indecision, or would have an inconsistency, certain, an inability to be able to stick to our own guns and have a desirable characteristic evermore, what's admirable. So integration is really simple. It means combining separate parts into a unified whole, like not going along with all this ridiculous climate change stuff, which is not having anybody model a single thing that's real whatsoever, and having too many variables all brushed aside, wow, for some political gain, which is an idea, which involves otherwise, you and I, where we all are bringing things together ever more, where our group processing is in groupthink. And so slow but sure ever moment, you're visualizing a way to look more, and this is a vestibular sense that you're using to sort toward and have things within, okay? And you're using direction this way, which is a vestibular word, and predicating your vestibular sense. So you could see disclosure where it should be, and conduct where it should be, and the outcome where things are, that's resource anchored and chained together, and a vertical integration where understanding is, and a use forward, and then using backtracking properly to look at what's being integrated. And so you're future pacing this condition wherever anything would have been a first, that would have had a backward directedness. Now it's ever more having something present to be more allowing you to be remaining more forward and toward. And so if you really hear about any great leader, of course, you could be certain that epsilon and lambda waves could be present where good leadership is, and you've got a calm, beautiful center and gamma waves, and you could want to connect with somebody who doesn't have 10,000 things going on where the brain is. So nouns and verbs, which totally are unspecified, and things could have just left you in a dreamy world, not having ever taken action, because it's not active language, or it's not specific. And so what's less frequent, or more frequent, and what's present tense, or what's your tense, and what's really acquired, and is it that your feeling is met by others, or is there some loss of some deep wisdom because you could see a bit of sleepwalking going on where life is? So what's hypnotized where your own presupposition is, and have you really got a good idea about things, and how much is your own jing where you are, and fitness, like testosterone, for instance, is evident, and what confidence do you have where androgen are. And so things really should not just grow tennis shoes, Lukey, and run off, for instance. It's really gorgeous, of course. Somebody's looking ever more in toward what is ever more the public actingness of everything. And so it's like kissing the ground and kissing the soil. But where is somebody who's wearing a robe, maybe bowing in a parade and all sorts of things, and how much egotisticalness, that's not self-love, but some disorder more. So ego is self-love, narcissism is self-love, and very usefulness of this, not that being a disorder. So a magnetic acoustics where the heartbeat is and your anatomy are all found. And it's beautiful in a studying of design, and the highest vibrational frequency where plants are measuring fragrance, for instance, like in the megahertz, like you've got rose and you've also got our blood. So frequency between 62 to 71 hertz can be essential for sort of optimal health and blood, and the synchronization of things where everything is. So 12 times a day, there is the possibility that you're releasing human growth hormone. You're more in a parasympathetic stage. Your left nostril is more open than your right. And it's really how somebody becomes far more aware than what we all are, maybe as a group, relative to be ever deeper and more conscious, you see, of our senses. So if you're looking at nitrous oxide because you're laughing and you have, openness inside, you've really got this 6-carbon dimension and oxidedness where everything is allowing you to have opened your brain up ever more to let everything drain out like it should. And so somebody pulls the plug on the drain and it drains overnight. How good is that supposed to? And the dark is really helping you with all of this, the quality of the dark and hemisphere synchronization while you're sleeping, and how much epsilon and lambda wave carry more gamma, and piggyback where this is in your life. It's really who's in control, you know what I mean? Where sleepwalking would have been, where that would have been. So sleeping with the cold is better, because now you're able to shrink a nerve and things become more relaxed light, and the nerve cells shrink, causing interstitial space between them to be increased more, 60%, and this reduces tissue resistance where that is, and allows the bulk flow of cerebral spinal fluid through your brain. So, it's real good, like, you're getting a brain drain, you've got your nerve pulsations, and you've got a sleep slow wave brain, and no rapid eye movement and activity synchronized where your large slow pulsations are, and your central nervous system fluid is promoted to be more open and flowing. And what happens was that's not, you've got a bit of sleepwalking going on. And so tiny little end feet, of course, astrocyte have, that surround the nerve and blood vessel, and this crucial component enabling like lymphatic fluids to flow where the brain is. And these very little end feet have aquaporin in them, and polarized expression is so the system is functional. So in a vital manner, you've got these aquaporin 4-1 concentrated pores and open, and a concentration of these that are polarized, and these tiny little end feet are astrocyte localized, creating pathways so that your cerebral spinal fluid could flow through your brain, and parenchyma, you see. And so are we going to say that beliefs, things, thought, behavior, all things that have gone on the day before that you dreamt back through wasn't something, of course, any time in the day, even sleeping, that could have been present where you were, you could ask the question, who's in control while somebody's sleepwalking, where that is. So hypercapnia is a certain cause of all of that as well, and rapid breathing where stress would have been. So stress is a common response that can, of course, hypercapnia, change of proper function over time as it's stressedness ongoing. And it's common, not uncommon, for the hypercapnia itself, especially where somebody's overbreathing, where anxiety and panic and hyperventilatedness would have been. And so a superior cognitive processing to be relaxed and calm and more empty where things are, and have a large empty dormant area where it's usual. It could have been really busy and flat out going on where something is, and all kinds of inhibitions and dissociations and all kinds of I need complementariness of this, that, the other, and all linked to something that wouldn't have been too efficient. Why? Because you just got to get A to B. Don't have to go through all these other modes to get from A to B. So what's highly efficient and neural efficiency, it's really that you've got good friends and mates and people around you. Otherwise, it's certain that your friends would be just as rare as hen's teeth, you see. And why? Because you've probably been on default mode network. A default mode network could have been specific to a network that where your brain regions were active, where the brain really is more at rest, and during introspection or mind wandering, individual sorts of activities. And so in those moments, somebody doesn't really have an ability much to express much. And so this default mode network could have become established more and associated more to a lower level of what care would have been for yourself. And so the performance that you have could be comfortable where you are. Maybe that's something which you could book a session, and for us to actually clear up stuff. It only take an hour, and you've got a technique that's been given to help you achieve something that you want to achieve. So it really is, just in summary, conclusion, of course, a reason that you could consider how much is someone in executive control where things are, and how much did you trigger people to be in some other state, and did you goad them to do that? And you don't think people could be goaded to do things. It's like, no, yes, they can. So transient hyperfrontalness, where aversion would have been, and a sure showing where the face is all turned down and mean-looking kind of face, where the corners of the mouth are turned down, and furrowness is of the brow, and very squintiness is more of the eyes, and the zygomaticus major of your face is sort of pulls your cheeks back more, so you've got creasedness around the mouth, and typically the lips become more pressed, together. So somebody's more left-orientated accessed and more accessing information from more flexive muscles versus extensive muscles. And you and I, we all can get a sense of, what the emotion is that someone is expressing more. So you're calculating whatever it is of peace or risk and things, and how do you respond to where that is? How much, jing do you have where testosterone is sort of more powerful where you are, where blood flow could be on command more. But what if you don't have your jing? Yes, you see. And so for him or for her on your more libido where life is, somatopause is certain. And those are things which could just, cause you not to necessarily be too much in control where you've just been going on where sleepwalkedness would have been. So a higher IQ is associated with more and more grey matter in your brain and more white matter. It really is clear that you've got way more frontal connectedness of parietal regions and things. And otherwise, that's areas of the brain which really could have not been going on per se. So it's like an app is missing for facial recognition or something. And so it's sort of like an example of who's in control where you've been sleepwalking, and there could have been a lot of psychological mutism toward areas where you should have a little bit more of a focus. So it's interesting that the septal region is firing, is really active, and it neurologically and inhibiting the componentry of the aversion and amygdala. And so your prefrontal cortex has to be able to get information to your postmotor cortex for memory and things like this, you see. So it's very formidable, otherwise honest. Your brain and its gorgeousness of its dorsal anterior cingulate, where its anterior insula is, you could learn a little bit more about brain function, of course. These are areas that underlie feelings of social rejection. And so one could have specialized states where nerve underlies some manifested internal response, like we're talking about. And how does this fit where your brain is and its usage? And what's averted evermore where life could have been instead? You see? Yes. So whole brain functioning is you, including conditions of thought like, oh, what could have happened that I did have some injuries and traumatic brain condition of stroke and massive behavioral adverse polarized sorts of dialogue and things, non-stop sort of cortisol and high calcium levels and having a stone heart and stone vessel. And so neurological conditions of attention deficit hyperactive disorder towards sort of autistic types of conditions and things exacerbated well and truly by cystic fibrosis, a bad habit and not sleeping, and chronic stress and sleep deprivation. Okay. So how about changing all of that, eh? Getting a proper dopamine level versus no, it's depleted. Going to the gym and working out a bit more, and having parts of your brain that require you to carry out ever more, become more active, but where you're finding active language. Who's using active language? And we're reading a lot of stuff, especially AI, God help us, there's not much active in any of that. So your default mode network could have caused someone to be daydreaming and life procrastinating and just wishing and whining and what's going on there, but not really anything that's actually proper. And so where you're providing resource states that's large enough, you could really collapse any stuck state into this. And that's really the message of things that we've got today, I say. You've got effects of superposition, it's undeniable. You've got all of this conducted where information is across space. You've got a JC quanta. You've got energy sources where things are, and controversial types of applications of that, which we've just been talking about, where things are. But you've got radio wave capturing, and you've got energy in a NASFET system, and of course you've got this now more where industry is, where you can have a MOSFET, a metal oxide semiconductor field effect transfer, instead of a noble element semiconductor field effect transfer. I mean, so equipment is being built to be able to tap more energy, and so your energy metabolism, who's going to say that's not part of your control, where you're no longer sleepwalking, perhaps. And just like the pyramids of Giza were energy generators a long time ago, and how radio waves have been more captured, where essence is, you're not going to tell me that your interest, your association, your congruence, your integration is not giving you a good bucking system to be able to cause you to have a nice MOSFET device that's absolutely causing you to have good energy, and so you'll be able to get into your frontal cortex versus being just on the couch in the past, sort of thing. So what's this recent, ever more technology of understanding how this, this monatomic element is of its own semi-field effect transfer going on, where our body is, and energy is transmitted more through the semiconductive state, and that's traveling along the myelin sheathing of the nerve fiber that you have. Anyway, I think it's pretty amazing, Lukey. We should sort of wrap our show up a bit, eh? But who's in control, honest? And where sleepwalking in is like, what's really automatic? What's happening below the surface of consciousness where things are like that, yes? And who's in control where we are, where things are, you know? And could you easily have otherwise been led astray, you see, yes? So you've got, freedom bills which should come along where things are. No longer could we sort of just remain where title conversion is, where man or woman doesn't appear in any document. But anyway, so that's another story. Anyway, I hope you're having a great day as you've been listening to this show, and let's catch up to each other in a future show. And Lukey, we'll just like, or might be something you want to add, mate.
Let's see. So, um, the anatomy of our brain, it grew towards what we're interested in. So it's kind of like we're built for pleasure.
Yeah, so that's right. Genetically, someone could pass on a brain that's way more frontal cortex orientated, well and truly, versus, so you could have a happy baby, for instance, or you could have a sad baby or an angry baby. And so you have these expressions as adults, you see, yes. So interest and pleasure has caused the anatomy of our frontal cortex to be grown. That's right. And interest and pleasure cause greater septal growing and less amygdala function. Right. And where aversion is, it shuts the frontal cortex down. It grows more amygdala connection. And so it reduces the amount of septal function relative. Yes. So somebody can be more positive or negative, but knowing these things are all very functionally plastic. That you could come along to have a meditation like we're just talking about and grow the things that's proper. Yeah, that's right, Lukey.
Okay. I was gonna say it sounds like it's functional plastic type of thing. Um,
Yeah.
so I know that like the survival of the fittest ideas like outdated, but would you say that like more positive people like do better in life because they're going with nature and they're able to like like procreate more? Maybe that's how like the 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 health happy the more positive people like made
Oh,
more
yes.
babies.
So our 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 whole body is set up from this, like you're talking about, and what's social. Everything is sort of very instinctively social, and if that's allowed, instinct is properly allowed, but instinct cannot be being allowed. It could be overridden by where someone is. And parts of their brain could be asleep a little bit, yeah. It's like they're sleepwalking. So they're not aware that we should have a Bill of Rights, for instance. Yes, and we should not have the sensation of anything original in our mind of being taxed and fined and those sorts of things. And what discriminatedness was, where anything mandated was, and things indiscriminate, and where you see people just having official discretion taken, yet that's not upheld any right that you and I have whatsoever. And did anybody do due process where that is? No, they didn't. And, a lot of compensatedness exists right here now for what was COVID, for instance, you see? yeah, and people that just got kicked out of where they were because they wouldn't participate in something. But it was very selective how all of this was done, and not anything efficacious behind all of it. Yeah, but did people go along with a lot of that? Yes, they did. Or they didn't. They just were forced more to. Definite. We saw it, right? Because lots of marching was, lots of popular protests were certainly massive, matter of fact. So wouldn't you say that would be the actual lawful cohesive force rather than being drugged? And so you're not going to say that some action wasn't very unpopular, fully outright, but yet that went on where it did. How could something completely opposite what you and I would ever be thinking about go on without a criminal bank cartel of one world order be behind the whole thing, kit and caboodle, where you and I are? And isn't it something which we should sort of look at because we all could have a better, brighter future together? Yeah, positive economic. Our offspring can have more cells expressed that change the involutedness where your brain is, where synesthesia is, to come to have more wisdom where you have this. And this is something which gets passed on as part of our group mind, more group think. So it's not as easy to be led astray. Somebody couldn't necessarily be focused of, oh no, what's essential, where choice is, versus something that's alongside some sort of agency. Yeah, that's, questionable as to whether you're actually flowing under your own, set of agency or not. Which you should be, because you're under oath to people, you see. And so when you're not, oh wow, that's going to be not too good. You're supposed to look to see if any harm, injury, cost or damage was, absolutely. And if not, then no crime has existed, so stop. Of course, some law could have been, and if some crime was, well, okay. But because a law was written in a shall and a shall, it means in the future. And let's stop doing things, that's endemic, where law enforcement is, that peace officers evermore are, where things are. Otherwise, like, could you say that all of those things get set up, and what was all the interrogatories beforehand? You see, and what was the interrogatories? Who was involved? Where things were to goad and create from presupposition all sorts of things which aren't truthful whatsoever, perhaps. You see, yeah. So anyway, this work really causing people to be more, master mode, more of ourselves. Well, just in a moment, somebody is, how much time does it exist? So many things that we notice, but that you could care to be able to help. But you could notice a lot of things, the way somebody responds, for instance, and rather than being able to be more calm, they always are knee-jerked. But could they listen to a tape, and could they hear about things and start to remember a whole brain pattern more by using direction properly? Because direction has been used incorrectly, where some aberration is. Somebody's moved toward pleasure in a way. Somebody's moved toward aversion, excuse me, in a way, away from pleasure and toward aversion. See, so using direction not in a proper way, where things are. So people could correct where that is themselves. Or everybody there is like acting upon everybody else in some way. And what's your response where this is to be empty and eye awareness, basically? Yeah, that's right. Always, would you say better it is that everybody's more in their spontaneous creative intelligence evermore, and because, well, yeah, that's right, life is ever more unscripted, isn't it? Yes. Yeah. So you should have more fact checks, and things are more multiple caused, not singly caused. One would be looking then more at what more is real versus, you're not looking at things more real. Fundamental, of course, transgressions have gone on. Nobody say that hasn't occurred. God help us. Yes, it has. Rights and everything was taken away from people. What for? Something under the UN, which is something sort of volunteered to. No one ever was behind any writing, and if any of those laws, all of those laws are all written to just control the crap out of you, period, outright, for what reason exists like that. It's the transgression against our rights and things which suddenly really is honest, not proper where it is. And so how much is it that people could say some bustedness into your home is where things are, and not any proper servedness of any nature whatsoever, and only things of presupposition going on to cause things to be existed, and money behind the scene going on, and some money is more there as a gravy train. Maybe that's not to do absolutely with your condition, but it is if you knew how to set that off, and that's your remedy. Anyway, sort of another story about things. You've got certainties, absolute power can have destroyed, and servants from where we are as people. So we all have property right, which flows from our title as our species. We're man, and not a word like person, which you could imagine some strict, fair compensatedness should be, because something has gone on that's been to total detriment of people where they are, because policy doesn't exist like it should, and that's like the right side of the court where things are, isn't it? It's where the private side is, where things are, and that's where we the people are, you see. And so, you can't get something which doesn't have any verified claim whatsoever behind it, and presupposition, and just bust into people's lives, and have only corpus delicti behind it. It's a constant erosion where you're looking at that of yours or my natural right, and government really is only a form to protect your private property. And could things be outside your control? I reckon that's going on, because why? You've got all these massive convoys that went on where people were really upset about policies of COVID and things. And you've got the popular protests which showed that a lot of government transgression could have had to have existed to force people to be drugged. And how did those lockdowns impact your brain and things afterward, ongoing now to the day, and self-monitoredness, and what are you doing where you are to become more aware, so that you can be more in control of things. We as a people, we should have a supreme charter, and where that's loose as a goose, or where is that? These are things which should really be brought out ever more, Otherwise, yes, that's right. Who's in control where anybody's just sort of sleepwalking? All right, mate. Love you, mate. We'll catch up to each other.